the round of 64 big recap. What is some of the biggest storylines that you've seen from the first 2 days of March Madness?
Yeah, I'm excited to be back. March Madness has been a lot of fun so far, and there's been a couple storylines, maybe not as many as your typical March Madness. I feel like this has been one of the more predictable ones. Everyone's kind of saying there hasn't been really a 1-2 upset yet that we've seen, at least at the time of this recording. And there's always a team that falls kind of a little bit early, and that team this year, unfortunately for us too, was Clemson. McNeese took it home, just barely beating Clemson in the round of 64. And I think that's definitely the biggest storyline to come out of this year's March Madness, at least so far. Obviously, leading into the conference tournament and into just March Madness in general. Their student manager, Amir Ora Khan, if you want to give that to him as his middle name, was one of the bigger storylines. He's the first student manager to ever sign an NIL deal and make that 3 actually pick Buffalo Wild Wings and another like really big sponsor that he has kind of just all over his boombox, if you want to call it that. So that was a really big storyline. Obviously, a lot of people picked McNeese for solely that reason. No, like if you ask a lot of people to name more than 2 or 3 McNeese players, they couldn't, but everyone knows Amir Ora Khan, if you want to call him that. I wasn't too high on them, and I think for good reason. They're not the most fun team to watch. They played a really scrappy game and forced Clemson into 11 turnovers and only 13 points in the first half of that game. But I think Clemson really showed, besides the fact that like the going away from the storyline a little bit with McNeese, Clemson showed that they were the better team late in that game. With 8 minutes left to go in that game, they outscored McNeese 38-18. And if they could have put together any stretch like that during the first half, they easily would have won that game. It's just really unfortunate that they came out so slow to start. Literally, they had only 2 more points than turnovers in the first half. It was just kind of upsetting to watch somebody who had them in the Elite Eight, because they are so much better than what they played like. And I mean, congrats to McNeese. But I have another hot take coming out of this. I'm not a big fan of Cinderellas. Like, I like 1 or 2 or like a couple that like can kind of just like go through the round of 64. But that year where we had like a bunch that was kept on falling, eventually that the Cinderellas aren't going to make it as far in the tournament. And then as the later rounds progress, there's less and less games. And then the less and less games, the quality, I feel like, decreased a little bit when there's Cinderellas, because it feels like the Cinderellas always end up getting blown out towards the end of the season. So I mean, it's always a fun story, but if they make it past the Sweet 16, I'm a little bit upset. So the fact that there haven't been as many upsets this year, I'm not all that mad.
Yeah, that's actually a really good take. I've heard some people say that in years past, where it's like, oh, this team, because there are Cinderellas that do make it fairly far to the Elite Eight or to the Final Four. Even we've seen that in recent years where they do actually end up getting some wins under their belt that's further than the Sweet 16. And yeah, you're hoping that these games aren't blowouts, and then you get one and you're like, oh man, well, there's nothing else that I can watch. You can't just turn the TV and watch something else, right? So not like the earlier rounds. So I completely get you on that. Going back to the McNeese State game, it's very interesting that that's the main upset that we've seen so far, I would say, right? That there hasn't been a 13-4 upset, even though I believe Texas A&M got a little bit of a game from UNC Wilmington, and they shot 46 3-pointers, which I believe was the most for them ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Clemson, if they didn't have such a terrible first half, one of the worst first halves that we've ever seen, really, probably in the tournament, from a competitive seed, and also at the same time, probably the worst that team has ever played, or all year together. And so they're definitely kicking themselves. You mentioned that they outscored them 38-16 in the last 8 minutes. They scored 54 points in the second half. And when you go from 13 to 54, that's when you know something was going on in that first half, that you kind of partially do have to give it up to McNeese State, though, too, right? Because you don't that doesn't just happen on one side of the ball. But certainly that the Clemson team was good, and it's unfortunate that they played their worst half of basketball in the first round of March Madness. Another thing I wanted to bring up was, I think we were kind of dead wrong about UNC. I had them going a little bit further than I think you did. Did you have them losing to Ole Miss in the first round?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, okay. Hey, there's so many brackets, bro. So I don't. You fill out some more brackets than I do, but I had UNC going a little further. I was buying it. I was thinking that they were going to show the world that they belonged, that they were going to do this, that, and the other after their huge win a few nights ago, and they just came out flat against Ole Miss. That game wasn't even close, and then got kind of the final score kind of got a little bit close, but yeah, UNC just kind of shattered my heart a little bit there too.
Yeah, I mean they cut it to one possession with what 2 minutes left. That the RJ the game was relatively close towards the end. Like it had me as somebody who was rooting for Ole Miss, a little bit scared. But I mean, for the majority of that game shouldn't have been in doubt and wasn't in doubt. I think there was a stat that came out during one of the broadcasts. I forgot which one, but I think it was during the Clemson game that no team had ever come back like since 1990. Teams were like 200 and like zero when they've been leading at halftime by more than 15 points, and that was the case for the Ole Miss game too. It definitely came down to the wire, but like for the majority of that game, it just felt like it was out of hand and out of hand just because like UNC was just shooting terribly for an extended period of time. Like it felt like they made a bunch of runs and then just chucked up shots with 20 seconds on the shot clock with like threes that like, didn't need to be taken and they weren't making them. UNC easily could have like came back and won that game. I was kind of thankful that they didn't because of like the amount of brackets that I did have with Ole Miss winning that game. But I mean, I respect the fact that they at least put up a fight towards then and didn't decide to kind of just phone it in.
So another game that I chose as an upset that was incorrect was High Point over Purdue. Just figured Purdue coming in 3-6 over the last 9 games. High Point maybe has some sort of Cinderella storyline that you could see waking up and on the news. I thought that was a perfect kind of storm for them to win. Also, Yale just wasn't able to handle Texas A&M. At certain points, they ended up losing by 9. I didn't know if you had any thoughts about the 13-4s just kind of coming up empty in this tournament.
I think that throughout the tournament, a lot of like the experts were saying that the top seeds were like really good this year, and I think that a lot of them proved that. Obviously, there were some closer games in here, but a lot of especially the 1-2 matchups, they haven't been all that close. Besides maybe the Alabama Robert Morris game, and even that game, it never really felt like Alabama was in trouble. I don't think they trailed during that game, so just the wide.
Robert
Yeah,
Morris took the lead with 8 minutes to go, but after that, it was just straight all Alabama. I think they maybe had one lead that entire game.
yeah. So just the overarching theme of this March Madness is just that the top seeds are really good this year. And even with Alabama struggling, like Robert Morris probably played the game of their life and they weren't able to pull it out. Alabama does what they do. They score a lot of points and they're going to be tough to beat no matter what round. So I think that's just the overarching theme for me. I'm not really taking much else from those games. Just the fact that like the top seeds are really good this year. Obviously Texas A&M got like, it was a game and there was some other games that like have been close, but it just doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like the Cinderellas are really like taking it to any of the top seeds this year, at least not in my opinion.
Yeah, they're not really out this year as they have been in the past, but there are still a handful of games, as we mentioned earlier, that are still to be left to played. UConn, Oklahoma, that's 8-9 matchup. Xavier, Illinois, 11-6. Bryant, Michigan State, that's the 15-2 that maybe some people are keeping an eye on. Others are buying Tom Izzo, saying he's going to bring them back. And then Liberty, Oregon, which I actually have Liberty in that game, but for any specific reason, don't ask me why. But that could be a 12-5 matchup that we end the night with that could end up giving us another upset. Is there anything that you're looking from those games that you might pinpoint for a lower seed to win?
I like the Liberty matchup a little bit. I have Oregon personally advancing, but that Liberty team is a good team. Again, don't ask me why.
Yeah.
They're in the tournament. They're anything can happen. I mean, I had Utah State beating UCLA in the nightcap yesterday. I wanted that to happen. They absolutely got crushed. So I mean, it would just be nice to, if nothing else, it would just be nice to see like somebody else kind of come out, like one of the double digit seeds come out of this first round. Like I just said that I'm not a big fan of Cinderellas, but I mean one or like a couple more wouldn't hurt anybody.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of people who kind of they want answers whenever the round of 64 is like this. When there's maybe we could be done with this and the lowest seed that advances is the 12-5 matchups and it's the 12 seeds. They want answers. Is it NIL? Is it like anything else? Or was there any contributing factors to it? I think it's just year to year, it's so different. And you kind of have to balance out the percentages too, right? Like the 13 or the 14 or the 15 seeds can't always go to the Sweet 16. Like it's not always going to happen. And sometimes you get a little bit of a rude wake up call, but then a 9 seed goes all the way to the Final Four. And then now we're talking about a different like type of Cinderella, maybe a dark horse like we talked about in the March Madness special, right? Where we were choosing a lower seed who maybe isn't a Cinderella to go even further in the tournament.
Yeah, just as a general recap thing, I wanted to go back to the last episode where I did kind of my upset picks. and went out and just said I gave one, and then said Clemson, and like on the opposite end, where I was saying like upsets that won't happen. McNeese, I said wouldn't beat Clemson, which is just a little unfortunate because I went out and said that for no reason. But on the opposite end of that, I said that Colorado State was going to beat Memphis, and they really, I feel towards the second half, they really took it to Memphis. Like they were out rebounding them on the offensive and defensive boards. Like everything just kind of was going Colorado State's like way in the second half. After trailing in the first half, they just really, it was a lot of fun to watch somebody who like kind of called that upset. Colorado State was also favored, and they've won 11 straight now. So I mean, props to them, and I'm looking forward to what they're going to do against Maryland next round.
And also, there's an art to staying off of an upset like that, because there were a lot of people who were picking Colorado State, just as in maybe every 12-5 matchup gets kind of debated whenever it comes March. But we stayed off of the UC San Diego and Michigan upset, and that kind of proved to be right as well. So at least we got something right in the round of 64.